Thanks for coming out tonight, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about how to play with others, workplace edition. So just to get a kind of feel for the room, who here works in a product company versus an agency? The product, put your hand up. Okay, so agencies. And I'm guessing that everyone else is not technical and came for pizza and beer. Cool. Well, Anki, get more pizza next time. Cool. So I'm going to predominantly be talking about things from a product company point of view, because typically in like an agency style, just to kind of put some definitions around that, agency will be where the service that your company offers, a customer will come in, you'll build something for them, you'll sort of rinse and repeat. So like Arc Group, they're fancy, but sort of an agency style model. Whereas a product company would be like, you know, if you worked for Microsoft and you worked on making Microsoft Word, like, you know, good times. But ultimately, you offer a digital product that people come to, they pay for that product, and you know, everything tends to have like hectic time dilation in a product company. So, you know, your sprints that last 2 weeks in a big product company, they might last a year. You know, Microsoft with Microsoft Word, for example, sometimes their planning sessions can be a 3-year period, just for the bugs that they want to fix. So yeah, very, very different. But what I'm going to talk about is how to play with others in the context of working in a product company. So a little bit of background about me. I have been an engineer at a few different places. So probably my largest stint was working at Expedia. Expedia is one of those big travel companies that pretty much if you leave your house, Expedia will somehow get a clip of that ticket. So they've got 23,000 engineers. When I worked for them globally, they owned about 50 sub-brands. And anytime you got on a plane or book a hotel or anything like that, they got some money. So working in that kind of environment is a bit of a challenge, because typically when people start at a company like that, they are suddenly, you know, a very, very, very small fish in a very big pond. And there tends to be a couple of people in that pond that are the absolute like whale sharks, and everyone kind of knows who those people are, but you don't necessarily interact with them ever. You know that there's decision makers out there somewhere, but actually getting access to them is something that probably won't happen. And something that I'm going to talk a little bit about is the difference in developing soft skills and hard skills. So who knows what that means straight away? Cool, got a couple of people. So hard skills are like, I'm good at Python. I'm not, but if I were good at Python, that would be a hard skill. A soft skill would be convincing a stakeholder that their urgent business request probably isn't actually that urgent, and it's not a good idea, and we can probably put it in like the icebox for 6 years, and then I'll leave the company and never work on it. But the ability to communicate things like that effectively is absolutely worth its weight in gold. So about 4 weeks ago, I kind of made the big scary jump from being a software engineer to moving into management. So I took on a head of engineering role at a Canvas scale-up. We had 100 outsourced developers, and they asked us to start converting that over to being an in-house team. So growing an in-house team from a company that had only ever had a relationship with an outsourced team is a real challenge. You know, their expectation and their understanding of technology is that they're slow, they're a faceless group of people that live somewhere overseas. We throw them requests, they typically don't do a very good job of that request. It comes back broken, and then rinse and repeat, hope the business grows, but it may not, or it might. So that was kind of what I was going into. But it was pretty exciting because, like medicinal cannabis, it's a pretty big emerging industry. This year, the company is probably going to do 300 million, fingers crossed. And a lot of that is just because it is an emerging industry. The technology that we're actually using isn't anything particularly complicated, but something that's really interesting about moving into companies like that is you start to see something that my boss talks about all the time called Conway's Law. So does that mean anything to anyone? Okay, cool, one person. So you know what it is. Don't correct me if I butcher this explanation, but I'm going to. Sorry?
I just keep putting my hand up though.
Okay, cool. I can work with that too. So Conway's law basically says that the software that your organization builds will reflect the way that the people in the organization talk to each other. Like how they email each other, how they communicate, how they meet to coffee, things like that. Which is kind of a really interesting concept. And the first time I heard it, I was like, that's not true at all. And then I started to think about, like, at companies that I've worked at before, you have a team and they publish an API. And quite often, you may not talk too closely to that team. You know about their API. The API is probably more than you know about that team, which is kind of amusing because, like, there were humans behind that. Like, somebody built that, and it's just like this thing, this like ship in the night that, oh yeah, we talk to that API. And then when we have issues with it, we complain about it internally, and we say, that API, oh, the payments API, Jesus, like that thing's terrible. But quite often, that's where the conversation ends. And so with Conway's law, it's really interesting because you want information in a business to flow. So you want to, so that if there's an issue with something that transfers through that API, that isn't something that is a mystery. It might come back to you in like an error header. It might come back to you as an email, someone alerting you of something, but the information needs to flow. And it was really, really interesting to me because when I first started in this role, we had issues where, as an example, the warehousing team had no idea what the payments team was doing. They each secretly thought that they were lazy. The payments team were always like, the warehouse team can never ship things to customers. And the warehousing team always thought the payments team never take money on time, and then we don't ship, and then customer complaints come in, and the business kind of just starts to crumble on itself. And that's obviously not something that we can scale very easily. So these two teams, they didn't talk to each other. The idea of having, like a whiteboarding session between the two to sort out their differences, that got shut down pretty hard. The warehousing team is too busy putting things in boxes. The payments team is too busy processing transactions and billing people and things like that. And so we started to make a few little shifts where the emails and the notifications and the communications that went out to one team, we started including the other team. And it was kind of an interesting change because you would expect that nothing would happen. You would expect that this team would just chuck that stuff in the junk and vice versa. But it's actually interesting because that is not human nature. And if you think about social networks, your Twitter feed, your Facebook feed, whatever feed you use of crap that gets like shoveled into your brain every morning when you do your doom scrolling, it tends to stick. Like there's something about that where the information that you pick up, it doesn't take very long for you to quickly glance through something and for it to stick. And just by kicking things off, by giving each team the opportunity to have an awareness of what each other was doing, we started to notice that if something was going to happen on team A and team B even glanced at it, they would be more aware of it, and they'd start to naturally reach out, form connections. And it basically took 2 weeks, which is like an insanely short period of time for these two teams to actually start talking to each other. So that's like an anecdotal example of how two teams sort of started off on a path. And the same thing happens with developers. So who here is like actively writing code for a day job? Okay, we have 5 people. It's like really.
You guys came for the pizzas.
Yeah, it's this I guess really doesn't fit in with my examples. But, I'll do my best. So who here, I guess, has had a scenario where there's been multiple ways to do something, and you've started a new company, and you've been like, wow, the way that they do this is bad because I know best. You may not have thought the I know best part. You might actually know best, but you had an idea about a process that you could implement that would have been a better outcome for the business. Like everyone said that before?
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, as experience, I would guess like this kind of side of the room.
Man, I feel it every day.
Yep.
Like, you have deadlines and everything, and it's like, oh, this shit should have been far better than how it looks like now.
Yeah.
Like given them more time.
Yep.
And given more things to research and do it better.
Yep.
So like, no, this is pushing deadlines, and you need to shift it today, and
yep.
After 1 hour.
But you're sitting right next to a product manager. So how does that conversation go down?
Unfortunately, I don't have input in his department. It should be more.
But when your devs do ask you for more time to fix an issue, or to make something a little bit better? What's the general business feeling?
It would be an assessment of the pros and cons, whether it's in the best interest or whether the deadline is a necessity one. So then you would then look at whether you need to put more resources into it to meet the deadline that's necessary, or whether the deadline can be extended to allow the extra time. So very situational.
Yeah. So to the room at large, what is in 95% of cases the goal of a piece of code?
The value of the company.
Okay, and that's kind of the answer I think that a lot of business owners like to hear, and it is definitely the thing that I say whenever somebody that I report to asks me why I'm doing something, because it will deliver value to the company. But if you kind of look at the crux of software, software is designed to take something that a person does and to extrapolate it away from that so that you can automate it and do it faster. Like, I believe, and I think everyone that I've worked with over the age of 50 could probably prove that most businesses could be replaced with an Excel spreadsheet and one guy that was like 70 years old knows all the shortcuts for Excel. You obviously, if you want to scale that, it becomes hard over time. But I think as software developers, we so quite often, I'm only talking to 5 people, which is a little bit hard. But the crux of software is that you have a problem and you want to automate it so that it can be done on triggers or on command. So an API call is really just a person that is just waiting there ready to go to do a thing, whether it be to write that down in a book being a database, or to rub something out of a book, someone deleting something out of a database. But that's kind of the crux of most software development.
But you want to do it well as a program. You want to make sure that piece of software that you've written or that API that you've written works well and does what it's supposed to do.
Yes, thank you for chiming in, because this, I think, is where a lot of business owners are going to get into that issue of what's your definition of well and what's their definition of well.
Does it do the job? Yeah. Well,
It does the job, but it's a shitty code.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've always pushed back against that. I think
And then you have to deal with people who don't understand it,
Yeah.
and you have to try to
that's it.
explain
Yeah.
your job to someone who doesn't have your knowledge.
That's it, yeah.
And I think the thing that I found really interesting about that is that typically, unless you're joining a startup that doesn't have a single line of code written, if you're joining any company that has handed in a P&L and is going, even if they had some profit, ultimately you're building on top of someone else's legacy. And the way that I like to think of legacy is legacy. Oh, you mean the thing that pays my paycheck? I think a lot of devs, they come in and, billions and billions of dollars have been built on like Fortran mainframes. No one here probably wants to work in that anymore, but there's sort of a certain level of respect that as developers I found it's been really useful in my career to recognize that that's the bedrock of the business, and that's what got the business to where it is. So nothing pisses off senior leadership like talking trash about the baby that got them to senior leadership in most cases. So I sort of want to talk a little bit about what it's like for software engineers to join a new team. This, again, 5 of you that have actually been in software, but for the rest of you that are just kind of coming along, this might just be a little bit of an insight into what it's like to join a new team.
Like, I work in this medical environment. I've seen the code written in 1985. I was not even born. I was like, what the hell? Like, I don't understand anything. Don't understand.
I mean, that's your fault for not being born.
Yeah. It's like when this code is still running on the banking and insurance industry.
Yeah,
I've seen modern code written like that. I don't understand what the hell's going on.
What the hell is going on is like, it just runs, it's take X and give Y, that's it.
it just works. That's
It just works.
very works.
Sorry about that.
No. I think it's all relevant because I think software engineers get caught up with this idea of like pure code and
Clean code.
And most people that I would probably say that 95% of the people that have ever talked about clean code to me, you actually ask like, where did it come from? They're like, oh, Uncle Bob. And you're like, oh, okay, like, tell me something about Uncle Bob. and they're like, oh, like solid principles, and then that's normally where that conversation ends. Like I've had to do a lot of interviews lately, and yeah, it's if you're gonna try to quote Uncle Bob well. So that's one piece of interview advice. Don't besmirch Uncle Bob. But yeah, joining a new team is hard. So this isn't specific to software, but most companies are not very good at onboarding, and I think saying not very good is, you know, a nice thing to say. Like that's really stretching the truth. At a role that I had previously, someone actually signed on as a tech lead, and then before they could get the code base up and running on their laptop, they resigned. And you would think, oh, yeah, they probably got shitty after like 2 weeks. This person was there for 6 weeks and couldn't get the code base running. And it wasn't like a hectic code base. It was just, you know, getting permissions to like Artifactory and things like that. Like it's hard. So I think something that was a real takeaway for me with starting as a new company where we are onboarding people so quickly, don't expect people to actually do anything useful quickly. They might anecdotally be able to give you some information if you're using generic services. I have a problem with AWS. Like everyone's heard of that. So lots of people have experience in it. So that kind of thing. But actually expecting someone to be able to do something useful in the first week is probably a stretch. Learning a new way of working is always really hard. So something that I've been experiencing lately is particularly front ends. And I mean, mobile developers are the worst of all, but people tend to be very, very particular about the way that they set up their IDE and which IDE they use. And nowadays with like VS Code and the JetBrains product, there tends to be the .IDE or the .VS Code folders. And then everyone tries to kind of force like their keyboard shortcuts and everything onto other people. I had a really good one this week where my enter key stopped working and you had to hit Command Enter to get a new line. And when I asked someone else, I was like, why is my enter key broken? And they're like, oh, how I prefer it. And so I decided to push that to the repo. And I'm like, that's going to really trip up some juniors. And, you know, every time a junior gets tripped up, you might lose like 2 hours of their time and then like an hour of a senior's time to help you fix it. So learning a new way of working was really hard. And I think for anyone that really does look at sort of moving towards leadership or management or even just up in seniority, writing documentation, it sounds like such a boring, stupid thing to say, but it really is worth its weight in gold. And I think for me, that has been probably the thing that progressed my career the most, because information you've got in your head, you can really only dish out to one person at a time unless you end up at a meetup where you're talking to like 30 people. But other than that, predominantly, it's only going to be you coaching one person or one person coaching you. So write things down lots. I think that's a real takeaway. For, like, I assume everyone here would know Atlassian. They would probably run Confluence at work. Yeah, it's pretty handy. Another sort of comment I've learned pretty recently, not rocking the boat. So my previous comment about the person that wanted to enforce that everyone had to hit Command Enter to make a new line, so Enter when using VS Code, that was kind of rocking the boat. And I think a lot of people, when they start a new role, and then what you commented before about the code's not clean enough, is that they start a new role and they typically say that in the first 2 days of their job. And immediately like, oh, that person, that's gonna be problematic. So has anyone sort of had a time in a role where you've just started and you've been like, this is really bad, and then you tried to present that and it's gone down a ton of bricks?
Yep.
Cool. Someone throw us an example?
Yeah, okay. I'm not in software, so I didn't want to pay them, but I'm in finance for people that do build software.
Yeah, this is Jake in finance, everybody.
So when I started with a company I worked for a few years ago, first week in there, came in, realized that our whole process was just talk to someone, throw a note somewhere, tag it. If you talk to them again, try and find new information. There was no database or anything. There was no files or anything. So trying to get anything done was just a fucking kick in the teeth. So sorry, I swear a lot. Then came in, I was like, this is just bullshit. I can't find half my clients' notes. I can't find this. So brought the information up to the director. He told me to go fuck off. What do I know? What's going on? He's been doing this for years. It's worked for him. So did nothing from that. And then I just proved my system worked better for about 3 months. And then said, cool, I've done this and I've outperformed the rest of the entire company combined just because I could find my shit.
Yeah.
So because I was able to, it didn't work at all, got backlashed on it. That director still fucking hates me. And then, but because I was able to prove it worked over a few months, not just a 1 week thing.
Yeah.
He was the other directors went, okay, this does work. Let's start investing in this stuff. And then it started trickling out and worked a lot better.
Yeah.
And then I got headhunted and left that company for a better one.
That's good.
That control enter issue,
Mhm.
all you have to do is have one meeting and say, you know, these are things that I think would help everyone. And they either say yes or no. And then you just go on, everyone goes on with whatever has come out of that meeting.
Although you gotta be careful with some meetings that
Like if you're
then
talking
it
to
just
the
keeps
owner,
going.
Yeah, but if you assume that everyone's, you're gonna give and take it, that it should work.
Yeah.
Or just have a pull request, I mean, PR review, wherein you decide this is not going to be more negative, there is something like. I found that this should have never happened, like the thing that you mentioned.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it
Like
comes
this
down.
should have just come up in a PR
Some
review.
people
And
start
this should
to
have
get
never went
creative.
to a repository.
Yeah. I mean, reaching decisions by committee is pretty important in software. I think it's pretty important in most businesses that, well, probably all businesses.
Like that's why we
Code
need
style.
these standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, there are these coding standards and other standards there. Like if I think you add like a, semicolon, to get that semicolon into production, it takes like 4 or 5 reviews and then it goes to production. Now the debit and credit can happen correctly.
Yeah. And I think when you first start to grow a new team, and I think when you first start in a new company, trying to implement those things are actually quite difficult.
Yeah.
Like it sounds really obvious when you come down the line a little bit. Bringing it up as a meeting, I don't know why. Mobile developers and front ends, you wanna watch two people like battle it out after Oxford commas on an array, like trailing commas for formatting. Front ends will turn that into like a 6-hour meeting. Like there's just something about formatting that I think it really should just be something that comes off the shelf. I think Go did that really, really well, but that's neither here nor there. But I think what it actually comes back to is delivering an appropriate amount of value. So I think when you start a new company, or you are looking to move to that next level, like what Jake said, the biggest thing that you need to be aware of is what value you're actually delivering to the company and what it looks like when you deliver value. So, at my very first job, I thought that I'd done a great thing by, optimizing a development environment. And my boss didn't care, because why would he care? Like, he wanted to ship little electronic devices. Me making the development environment better didn't help him. So I think when you do have a job, something that really helps you fit in and kind of move up as far as seniority is actually knowing what the KPIs of the business are, and then what your personal KPIs are, and then trying to meet somewhere in the middle. So like key performance indicators. So if the business wants to make X amount of dollars, ship X amount of units, and typically none of the KPIs of the business will ever align with the KPIs of the software engineer, who typically, want to increase their code coverage percentage and things like that. So you really need to start thinking about it from the business point of view. So if the business is losing X amount of sales because of errors, that's probably something that you could tie back to a KPI about code coverage and things like that. But something that I learned very, very quickly in sort of my most recent roles are going to the person at the top and saying, hey, we need more test coverage. They're not going to buy into that particularly well. So yeah, I learned that pretty quick. And another really big thing about when you join a new team is not burning out. So most people, when they join a new job, do you tend to find that you do stick to your 38.5 hours a week, or does your first week just go through the roof? Yeah. So that kind of continues on. Juniors in particular are always so keen to prove themselves. And the way that they do that is just bulk hours. And I think that's kind of quite an unhealthy trend in tech. I think especially, with work from home and just the general health of sitting at a computer all day, you need to take care of yourself. And I think that that's something that it's not really focused on enough. It is changing a little bit throughout the industry. We are getting more aware. Sorry?
But not quite.
No, I mean, most of us in this room are probably in for a disc replacement at some point in our lives, but yeah, hopefully not. Yeah, so I guess the takeaway for me from joining this new company, and I guess what I'm trying to talk about with working together in a team, is when you join a new team, you really want to focus on the value that you can deliver without overstepping, which typically, if you do try to align with the business's KPIs, that works really well. Be aware of Conway's law, and where you start to see those breakdowns in communication, fix them, because anyone can do that. That is something that you don't need to be technically aware of anything about the business. You can just start talking to people. Communication in business, it's the most important part of anything. Networks are just communication in electronics. So I think that's something that a lot of IT people and a lot of digital businesses don't really take into consideration that much. And yeah, I guess my third big takeaway is just don't burn out. Sort of take care of yourself, know what your limits are, know when you feel tired. And if you're communicating well with people, you should have a good idea of how you're going. So I think that really can help with not pushing yourself to burn out. But that's my main takeaways from moving across from working in engineering to suddenly having a team that I'm working with and sort of learning how to manage. Does anyone have anything that sort of wants to talk about, or just open up the floor to everyone here?
Do you miss being hands-on?
So I haven't totally managed to hang up the keyboard. Mostly requests of the team come through me, and some of them are small enough requests that quite often I'll just do it quickly instead of trying to hand over the context to somebody else. I think as the business becomes more aware of the way software teams work, things working in sprints, things like that. Like if I told the head of the warehousing division, sorry, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks when we start the next sprint, it'd be like, you can find a new job before then, which is fair enough because, in a warehouse, if there's something wrong and they can't get the stuff into the boxes, the business shuts down. So there's been a few things that I've had to adjust to there, and I don't think I will ever fully get off the code. I think it'll just move into more of an architect role. With healthcare, there's a lot of stuff with GDPR and data sovereignty and all kinds of things I'm going to deal with. So, yeah.
One question, like, what are your advice to talk to management or owners directly? Like, like they come with this brilliant idea. I just like had a dream. Like they're gonna launch a new feature, but we need it like this way.
Yeah,
like
that's a really good question.
Yeah, what would be like your advice on like slowing them down? Like, have you decided? How about?
Yeah.
Have you?
No, so my favorite thing to do is to repeat exactly what they told me straight back to them, but with a tone in your voice that makes it seem that you're very interested and want to draw more information out of them. And one of two things will happen. One, it will either give them enough context hearing their own idea mirrored back to them that they'll reconsider, or two, it will get you on board and you will agree with their idea. And then at that point, that's when you'll start talking about the technicalities of actually implementing it. And everything's a give and take. Even when I do have larger weeks where I do have to do, a little bit of extra time or whatever the case is, I kind of remind them, we're only here for 40 hours. If you would like to start this, and the thing that I'm currently working on is going to go over here. And then when I finish this, then we will get back to that. Most people are pretty reasonable. A lot of sort of senior management, their bonuses and their checks are based off the company performance, so they are willing to put in more hours. But if you're a salaried employee and there isn't a hectic bonus scheme that you're willing to throw dozens of extra hours into to try to achieve, it's not your job. You're 38.5 hours a week. Fuck that, you go home. And remember that, like, a big thing about working from home is you still have a life outside of work.
I'm so sorry because it's like just there.
Yeah, setting boundaries is really difficult. Learning how to manage like Slack notifications and things like that properly. You should learn how to do it. Everyone should know exactly how Slack notifications work. It will change your life. Like to be able to do like the remind me and things like that. It's great. Yeah.